Hi, I'm Ms. Lavodi, and in this video you'll see how to create a grayscale board game underpainting. To get started, make sure you have your board game still life drawn out on your canvas paper and make a black and white version of your board game reference picture on your device. You can do this by selecting the edit feature and filtering it with a black and white filter, and then you can make other adjustments to contrast, light, and shadow as needed. Next, you're going to prepare a paint palette by taking out some of your black and white paint from your paint cups and distributing it onto your palette. Use a plastic knife to help you do this. I'm separating out my white pile into several smaller piles of white, keeping some distance between them. And clean off your palette knife, and then you're going to dunk into the black paint, and you're going to stir in some increasing amounts of black into each of the white piles. So you're going to start off with a light gray, and then in the next pile you'll make a gradually darker gray by increasing the amount of black that you're adding to that white pile. You can make as many different piles of different types of grays as you want, but I try to stick with 4 or 5 different piles of gray, and again, gradually making each of the grays darker than the next. Start applying your paint to the different shapes of values that you see in your background or negative space. Try to match the different types of gray you see in your picture to the grays that you created on your paint palette, and then you're just going to start filling in your shapes. So you could start with the straight black shapes that you see, and you can move into the next darker gray shapes and then keep continuing your way to the lighter values. You could paint this in any way that works for you. One thing that I recommend is always being aware of how much paint is actually on your paintbrush, especially if you have to paint inside of small detailed shapes. It's a lot easier to manipulate thin layers of paint than it is to deal with globs of paint that are sitting on the surface of your canvas, because that's just going to kind of keep pushing around. It's not going to dry as quickly. So you just want to work in thin layers of paint and don't keep too much paint on your paintbrush. You can always redunk. Obviously, in between changing different types of grays, you can wash your paintbrush out with a little bit of water. You can use a water cup. I also just like to blot my paintbrush off on paper towel. Once we're done with the background, you're going to move into the foreground objects. I like to paint inside of the shadows first, so I find the darkest value inside the object, and then I paint the next darkest value right next to it, right up against it. Then I dry off my paintbrush on a paper towel. I do not add water, and I use my dry paintbrush to stamp next to the edges of where the dark and light value meet, and that allows me to blend my values together so I can create a smooth gradation. You can repeat this process as many times as you need to create a gradation between your values to make your object appear more three-dimensional. Once you've established where you need gradation, you can go back and look for things that need to just sit on the surface as different shapes of color. Then you can add back in shapes of white highlights. Let them sit on the surface so they can make the objects appear shiny if needed. Only blend in your white with other values if you see gradation. If you see shapes of white, allow those shapes to sit on the surface as little reflections and details. Don't blend everything out. It's definitely more important to maintain the different shapes of values that you see. Not everything is a gradation. Continue this process of matching the different values you see in your picture to where they belong on your canvas, and then soon your painting will be complete.